Thanks, Mandy. And hello, everyone. It's great to see you all here tonight, especially on a lovely evening outside. Whistler Lakes Conservation Foundation is thrilled to be able to partner with Whistler Institute in bringing you this event tonight. Melting Glaciers, Healthy Watersheds, and You. We chose a compelling title to tie healthy watersheds to personal responsibility. It's inevitably a bad news, good news story, and one that we want to end with hope, because I think hope to really, to be hopeful is to embrace a mindset, I think, that we're all part of the problem, therefore we're all part of the solution. Whistler Lakes Conservation Foundation is a registered charity committed to advancing aquatic and environmental research, education, and conservation. And we're an advocate and voice specifically for Whistler Lakes and watersheds. With the support of our partners, including the BC Lake Stewardship Society, the BC Ministry of Environment, the Resort Municipality of Whistler, Vail Resorts, and others, Raincoast Conservation Foundation, we monitor our lakes and waterways, we report on what we find, we promote lake-friendly living and stewardship through our outreach and education activities, which this evening is an example. And all this wouldn't be possible without our volunteers, a number who are in the audience tonight. You guys out there, volunteers on the lakes, give yourselves a hand, a raise. So for more information on what we do and how to get involved, you can head on over to our website at whistlerlakes.ca. And please know that you don't have to be a real scientist to be a citizen scientist. I'm not. If you're curious, willing to learn, keen to make a positive difference in the community, meet new people, and simply to have fun while you're in. And on the fun factor, for all of you tonight, each of you tonight, when you leave, we have a gift for you. It's a drinking water glass that is an enduring, long-lasting, functional gift. And thanks to Peggy English Research, it is a wholly produced, made in Canada gift. So Tom and Peggy will be standing out at the entrance doors when you leave to claim your gift. Actually, I better hang on to that. So it's now my honor to introduce and welcome our three all-star panelists. Dr. Brian Menounos is a full professor in UNBC's Department of Geography, Earth and Environmental Sciences. His research is aimed at understanding past and present climate change in Western Canada, with research interests in glaciers and glacier change, process geomorphology, quaternary and surficial geology. Brian's currently on a 2-year exchange, working with the Geological Survey of Canada on aspects of glacier change and geohazards. In 2013 to 23, he was the Canada Research Chair in Glacier Change, and he's also the Chief Scientist of the Hakai Institute's Airborne Coastal Observatory. Dr. Peter Ross is an internationally recognized ocean pollution expert, having published over 160 scientific articles and books and book chapters on pollutants in air, water, sediments, fish, and marine mammals. He's senior scientist at Raincoast Conservation Foundation, where he oversees its Healthy Waters program, a community-oriented water pollution monitoring program. Dr. Ross has held previous research roles at the Department of Fisheries and Oceans and Vancouver Aquarium Oceanwise Conservation Foundation. He's an adjunct professor at the University of Victoria School for Environmental Studies. During times of crisis, a few leaders always step into the spotlight with a new vision of bridging conflicting worldviews, and Michael Blackstock is one of these visionaries. As an independent Indigenous scholar and founder of the Blue Ecology theory, Michael's published over 24 peer-reviewed papers bridging science and centuries-old Indigenous ways of honoring nature. For the past 20 years, Michael has held senior positions in the BC Public Service and as the senior negotiator and manager of Indigenous employment and training at BC Hydro. Now, let's all sit back and enjoy our speakers as they take us through a journey from the glaciers to the sea and think about what healthy watersheds mean to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Lynn, Mandy, Tom and Peggy, and the Whistler Institute, and all of you for showing up. It's a delight to be here. And I'd like to take you through a little walk of glacier change and tell you exactly why we all should worry and be concerned about melting glaciers. These are beautiful snow and ice objects. How many people have been to Helm Glacier? Show of hands. Okay, some of you have. So this is Helm Glacier as seen from an aircraft we use to monitor the glaciers and have done this for the last decade or so. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how these glaciers are changing and then sort of talk about what we need to do, why we can be hopeful in terms of collective action. I have to see if I can actually advance these slides. Maybe I could just say next slide. Oh, there we are. Okay. So I was asked to talk a little bit about a little bit of history, and so I decided to go back about 50, 60 million years ago. So what you're seeing here is you're seeing a compilation of ocean sediment cores, ice cores, and also the instrumental records. So really looking at a very deep snapshot of Earth time. And what you can see with the colors is basically how warm or how cool the global temperature has become and was in the past. And so what you can see is we started off with a really warm climate, and that was largely due to greenhouse gas emission, greenhouse gas, CO2 in particular, being much higher than it is today. And through that 50 to 60 million years, we had a progressive decrease of that CO2 due to a number of factors. And Earth then started to go into repeated icehouse conditions, so glaciations. We had our last glaciation end about 11,500 years ago. And if we continue on the trajectory that we're finding ourselves with rising greenhouse gas emissions, then we're going to see a lot of ice melt on planet Earth. And that does have implications going forward. Next slide, please. So why does this matter? So I'm going to take you a little bit through why some of these points matter for us in terms of melting glaciers. So next slide. Okay, so when I talk about the cryosphere, or we talk about the cryosphere, we're really collectively referring to all forms of frozen water. So what I study and I'm passionately interested in is how glaciers are responding to past, present, and future climate. And so if we took all the ice in North America, that collective ice represents about 10 to 15 centimeters of sea level rise potential. So that's a substantial amount when we think about the number of people living within 1 meter of present day sea level throughout the planet. So sea level rise is one of those important implications. Next slide, please. We also have to worry a little bit about geohazards. So this is an example, or this shot is looking down Elliott Creek. In 2020, in November, there was about 18 million cubic meters of material. So a way to envision that is take all the mass of the Canadian automobiles, that's about 18 million cubic meters, and suddenly descend that into a standing body of water. That's what happened here. And it caused a large wave, about 100 meters tall, sloshing like a wave in a bathtub and then careening down this creek. It destroyed precious salmon habitat for the Hamalco First Nation. Fortunately, nobody was actually killed by this event. But when we think about our own closer to home in the Sea to Sky Highway, we do have retreating glaciers, and they do, in some cases, pose potential hazards. And those are things that we have to be considered or think about. Next slide, please. I'm going to walk you through a little cartoon here. So that imagine, for those of you snow-covered catchment with perhaps a little bit of glacier ice. And so if we were to think about the runoff from a particular creek through time, it's shown in this blue diagram here, we'd find that pretty much peaks runoff from the snow happens about June. But when we're talking about glaciers, it's really kind of later as that seasonal snow has been depleted. So next slide there. So that's that green slice. And so that's the component that if the glaciers were in climatic equilibrium, we'd see that melt each year. But that melt is being replenished by the snowfall coming in at the head of the glacier. And the movement of the ice allows that snow to get down to the toe eventually. And if you go to the next slide, right now, the glaciers are in strong disequilibrium with present-day climate. And so what we get is we get a bit of a kick. We get more water entering the creeks themselves. And it seems like a good thing, except like a bank balance, if you keep withdrawing, then you actually are going to lose that potential for that cool, plentiful water in late summer. So next slide there. So we kind of lost that. Now we lost that slice. So if we go to the next slide. If you've gone up to Helm Glacier, the one I started with, this is what it would have looked like in the early 1910s. So the photographer, well, we don't know who took this photographer, but it was an image stored at the Vancouver archives. So that's kind of what Helm Glacier looked like in the 1910s. And if you go to the next slide. That's kind of what the landscape looks like today. So if you haven't gone up to Helm Glacier, this is from Google Earth. But and if you could actually flip back and forth between that would be great. Yeah, so that's what it looked like in 1910s, and that's what it looks like today. Next slide, please. So what do we do? How do we actually measure this? That's a visualization. So there's a number of tools that glaciologists have to understand the quantity of water, where is it melting, how much is being lost. And so we have a whole variety of different techniques that we can use. The oldest would be the in situ measurements. So this is where we actually visit glaciers. I'm going up with scientists this Monday to Tuesday to visit Helm Glacier and also Place Glacier to do the annual surveys for the glacier. My work with Hakai, we actually use an aircraft, and so we can talk about the carbon footprint later about that. I'm well aware of, I too use carbon, unfortunately. But we have these ways of actually measuring how these glaciers are doing. So if we go to the next slide there. Very complicated graph, and I don't have time to walk you through it, so I've sort of just highlighted a green box. And this was a particular study that just came out last month, a collection of international scientists working together to figure out which tools do we have to best measure glaciers, so whether we're using an aircraft or spaceborne observations, and which measurements are consistent and diverge. So what I want you to focus on is that green box and that number 23. So that represents 23% of the volume of the ice in our part of the world, Western Canada, which has been lost since the year 2000. So we've lost about a quarter of the volume in the last 23 years. Next slide, please. And why is that happening? Well, I think unless we've been hiding under rocks, we know that the surface air temperature is getting warmer. But the surface of these glaciers are also getting darker. They're getting darker both because they're losing their annual collection of snow that accumulates high and at intermediate elevations. So the snow line is rising, but we also have a darkening of these surfaces. And so in addition to a warmer surface, or a warmer air temperature, which can melt more ice, these surfaces are also darker and they can absorb more energy from sunlight. So unfortunately, it's a 1 to 2 punch. And what we've been doing, so if you go to the next slide there, that image on the right is an ortho image that we've been doing these surveys over these glaciers. And what you were looking at is a late summer scene, and now you're looking at the change in the thinning, or how much elevation has been lost over these glaciers since 2017. So I started with the year 2000 to 23% of the volume. We're seeing, unfortunately, an acceleration even in the last several years. Next slide, please. Okay, so Garibaldi Provincial Park is on the Squamish First Nation, or as part of the Squamish First Nation. So I definitely would, very appreciative of working there, and also for the Lillooet First Nation at Place Glacier. If we were to look at the area change of these glaciers, the early 1700s, we had something about on the order of about 500 square kilometers of ice in Garibaldi. By about the mid-'80s, that was down to about 320 square kilometers, and then 2021, it's about 230. And just like the thinning, we're seeing this accelerated area change of these glaciers. So how do you visualize the amount of water that's being lost? It's about 1.9 gigatons. That's a weird sounding number. A gigaton is a cubic kilometer of water. And so how best to visualize it, if you know where Green Lake is, fill that up with 9 times and do that each year since 2017. And that gives you an idea of how much water is being permanently lost from these glaciers. I was supposed to be telling you about hope. I'm sorry. That's why I'm kind of wearing black in a way, but let's go to the next slide. What can we do about it? Well, I think we do know what we need to do about it, and it's a difficult ask. That is, it starts at the individual level, to the community level, to the national, and to the international. We know what the problem is, and we know that we have to mitigate greenhouse gas emissions. That's one of the most effective ways to slow the course of what we're seeing throughout the cryosphere in terms of melting snow and ice. Next slide, please. Okay, one more busy slide, and then I'll leave you with a movie. So again, I want you to focus in on this green box, and that green box is basically showing you that by the year 2100, so 75 years from today, in fact, when my son, who's out in the audience, will be 91, I don't think I'm going to make it, but I think he could. That's unfortunately what our glaciers would look like at 2 degrees of warming above present. And so the red color represents the amount of mass, or the amount of water, think of it as water, being left by the end of this century. And so what you can see is, unfortunately, we've committed to the fate of many of the smaller glaciers. Glaciers have memory, and so what we're doing today will affect them today, but it will also affect them for several decades ahead. And so if we want to actually slow sea level rise for the larger glaciers, every single degree of temperature change matters. And that's kind of why you often will hear scientists talking about reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. Next slide, please. So I just came back last month. Again, I'm part of the problem. I was on a plane going to Paris to work with other scientists and to celebrate the year of glaciers preservation. And so one thing that we did do is, as a community, is we're trying this year to make the call out about why glaciers matter, why they're important, and I've given you some insight into that. And what I'll do is really kind of leave you with a short movie as we transition to the next speaker, with some main bullets that will sort of convey or summarize what I talked about. So next slide. Okay, I'll leave you with this movie, and I'll go grab my seat. Thanks. Forgot to say that's on Place Glacier, where I'm visiting on Monday. So that's from a drone taken by the Hakai.
right. Good evening, everyone. Hard to follow up on that one. How many people are feeling upbeat and happy about the world around us? I'll try to take things on, and I do want to thank Whistler Lakes Conservation Foundation, and their logo is on my title slide. So, Mandy, very good, very good. My name's Peter. I'm going to be telling you about healthy waters, and when I looked at this previous overview of glaciers and what they do and what they're doing, I'm imagining that cascade of water coming down. Of course, you hear stories about city of Calgary getting most of its drinking water from melting glaciers. Glaciers are really, really important. What I didn't hear from Brian, but would love to have a glass of wine afterwards, is what do glaciers bring down with them? You know, glacial flour, there's silts and sediments and fines, there's pollutants that have been stored up there from atmospheric pollution, et cetera. Those glaciers are melting slowly, and that will be draining into and through our communities. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that. And this is working. Thank you. I do want to start really quickly talking about global pollution, what's around us. We just heard about greenhouse gases. We know that we live in a very small planet. But when we think about pollution in a local waterway, we have to start with LRTAP, long-range transport of atmospheric pollutants. And imagine for a minute, how long do you think it takes for air pollution to get from the Asian mainland to our mountains here? How many days? 4? Anybody else? 7? 1, 2. Very good. It's 5 to 10 days. 5 to 10 days. So sometimes Gobi Desert, there's a dust storm, and we'll see dust on our cars or something. That does happen. So air pollution is a global problem. Who are the most chemically contaminated people on the planet? Politicians. Maybe. Maybe. So the Inuit people in northern Canada are 10 times more contaminated with industrial chemicals than the average Canadian in the south or the average American. Not because the Arctic is more contaminated, but because they're eating higher in the food chain. And atmospheric pollutants are entering the Arctic food chain. And when you eat 125 kilograms of seafood a year, you're just that much more exposed to those types of pollutants. So we have an issue, and we have treaties like the Stockholm Convention that has done a great job at reducing the scourge of DDT and PCBs and dioxins and furans and chloridane and polybrominated diphenyl ethers. So there's lots of good stuff that has been happening, but we still got to be mindful that at the top of our watershed begins this story with atmospheric pollution. We can think about Asian air pollution landing here. We can also think, and we are detecting in our water samples in Whistler and elsewhere, the evidence of forest fires with the signature of polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons that suggests that forest fires are increasingly getting into our drinking water and source water. We can also think about regional industry in the Lower Fraser Valley and Puget Sound, et cetera, or more locally, that are emitting pesticides through agroforestry or industrial chemicals from a variety of operations. So there is also atmospheric pollution from these sources. A lot of people think about end of pipe for pollution, but this backdrop of global air pollution is not end of pipe. It's the cumulative complex mixture of soup that basically is enveloping or enshrouding our planet and complicating things for us. What we're trying to do and what we're doing together with the Whistler Lakes Conservation Foundation here and with First Nations and other communities on southern Vancouver Island, the Lower Fraser Valley, and all the way up to Kamloops and the Thompson, is to say, hey, what is the most important thing in our lives? Yep, sorry, Brian, it's not glaciers, it's water. Related, it's water. How long do we survive without water? 3 days. It's pretty darn important. And how long do we survive with water that's contaminated with agricultural waste? Maybe not even that long. So clean, accessible water is profoundly important, and we forget that in Canada because we have 25 to 30% of the world's freshwater supply. We have an embarrassment of riches that creates all sorts of problems. Who's responsible for water in Canada? Provinces. Sorry? The provinces. Provinces, the feds, the municipalities, First Nations, there are dozens of agencies at the government level that are responsible for different facets of water. So understanding the silo within one is operating is sometimes challenging. So what we're doing is we're saying we're looking at watersheds. Watershed is the currency of space that allows us to look at water that comes from the skies and from the glaciers and transits our communities. So we think about 5 simplified categories of water: source water, which is upstream of human activities; fresh water, which is kind of what I call fish habitat or salmon habitat; urban runoff. Put your hands up if you've heard of the chemical 6-ppd quinone. 6-ppdq. Anybody? A handful, not that many. That's that tire chemical that was discovered 3 years ago to be killing coho salmon. Up to 90% of adult pre-spawn coho salmon. It's from tires. That chemical is under emergency review in Ottawa right now because we pushed very hard. So that is found in runoff. And you get a pulse of it after a rainfall event, and then you get these acutely lethal concentrations in coho salmon habitat. So road runoff right now is a bit of a sexy topic, not only because of 6-ppd quinone, but because of things that we're trying to do about it. Green infrastructure, bioswales, other things, source control, best practices. Tap water, well, we're part of the water cycle and the marine environment because 80% of pollution comes from land. So we're putting all of these together to try to transcend all of the jurisdictions, boundaries, and silos that might otherwise constrain us from understanding what's happening to water along its journey from the mountaintop to the sea. So we find ourselves here in Whistler, where we worked with Lynn and Tom and Peggy and Neil and several others to sample water over the last 2 years. We come twice a year, dry season, wet season. We've got little stars, all the locations where we're sampling water, spread across those 5 buckets or 5 categories of water, and we're looking at 2 watersheds. And it took me a while to figure out that some of the waters here in Whistler actually drain to the northeast and then go down into the Harrison and then down into the Fraser and down to the Fraser River estuary. So really, we're on an island here with Vancouver, sharing it with Vancouver. We've got this beautiful set of watersheds that drain water down to the ocean. So as snow melts and as water flows downhill, really simply in a watershed, we can increasingly trace or detect contaminants that are entering the waterway or activities that are creating a degradation of water quality on its journey to the sea. And this becomes increasingly important to me because there's a lot of bad news in there. And I'm going to try to convince you that all the bad news that you can learn about pollutants getting into the water on its journey down to the ocean are intervention opportunities for the innovators in this room. All right? So think of it that way. The bad news empowers the good news. And just really quickly, we have these reports available online, and we do it every time we visit. But we find a little bit of everything here in Whistler. We found PCBs, fecal coliform, metals, a whole variety of metals, PFAS, per and polyfluoroalkyl substances. There are 15,000 of those forever chemicals. You've heard of Teflon and Scotchgard. They were PFAS substances. We found a lot of hydrocarbons. We looked for about 76. We looked for 70 or 80 different pesticides. We looked at plasticizers like BPA. You've heard of BPA. And pharmaceuticals and personal care products, which I've listed here, as well as tire chemicals. So we're finding all of these things in river water. And if we look up here, we're finding a diabetes medication at quite a high concentration in river water. Sucralose, you know what sucralose is? That's Splenda, the world's most popular artificial sweetener. And now the gold standard to trace human waste in waterways, look at that. It survives metabolism, it's water soluble, it survives wastewater treatment plants and septic fields. I find it in your waterway, it means someone is not maintaining their septic field or this wastewater treatment plant. It's not doing its job. We've got other things like caffeine. You've heard of caffeine, another tracer of human waste. DEET we're finding everywhere. It's an insect repellent. Penicillin, cotinine. Anybody know what cotinine is? Breakdown product of nicotine, so evidence of smokers. some other medications, and at the bottom of the list, cocaine. Cocaine and its metabolic byproduct, benzylogonine. So cocaine we find pretty much everywhere. It's not a shocker. It doesn't mean that Whistler has a problem necessarily, but it's surprising how widespread that drug is. So when we look at all of these concentrations, we can measure them up against environmental quality guidelines and say it's either safe for salmon or fish or it's not, or it's safe to drink it or it's not. The problem is in Canada, of the 600 pollutants that we measure, we have environmental quality guidelines only available for fewer than 10%. What do we have? What do we do for the other 90%? There are no drinking water quality guidelines for any of these substances. There are no drinking water quality guidelines for any pharmaceuticals in Canada. So the Ministry of Health turns to me and they say, Peter, that's really great that you've got some great chemistry numbers, but we can't do anything with this. And so we don't really want you sharing this with First Nations. And I go, Bob or Dr. Bob, how much cocaine would you say is safe in water then? And he basically has no answer. So we have a bit of a catch-up game to play with regard to environmental quality guidelines or drinking water quality guidelines. But at the end of the day, these are still tracers of what's getting into water, and they tell us basically how our systems are working upstream and what we can potentially do about it. A simplified way to look at our 5 categories of water in Whistler is on this page here. In red, we've got the road runoff category. No surprise, road runoff, ditch water is filthy. We found the highest levels of nutrients, hydrocarbons, forever chemicals, polychlorinated biphenyls, PCBs, and the tire chemical 6-PPD quinone. Stream and river, we found fecal coliform, pharmaceuticals and personal care products, and sucralose. Dare I say that we're detecting in Whistler River water some influence of human pharmaceuticals, human waste, human activities? Absolutely. Source water, tap water, pretty darn good. Down the marine environment, lots more metals. That's probably more of a natural thing. So this starts to give us a hint as to where we have problems. A lot of people say, why are you measuring road runoff? Why are you measuring dirty water? And I'm going, well, it's something I can put as a bookend against that source water, because that source water should be cleaner than anything else along the journey from mountaintop down to the ocean. And all of these other contaminants are being introduced directly or indirectly as a result of human activities. So what does this do? Well, as mentioned, pollution comes from all of us. And the bad news, in my view, can be very powerful in informing the good news, which means the innovation, the solutions, the green infrastructure, the different things that we can use as a team to collectively protect, understand, and restore. Restoration of habitats is a huge, burgeoning activity these days. So the team approach is super helpful. And what are some of the solutions? I like to work with our partners, a lot of First Nations, and allow them to come up with solutions based on what we're detecting as problems. But just to give you a hint of the types of things that one can think about is ensuring that you take your used medications and pharmaceuticals down back to the pharmacy. Everybody knows that the pharmacist is required to recycle your used medications. Is that correct? Yeah. Just take them all back in there and they'll recycle them properly. Septic maintenance, if you're on septic, you want to clean it out, maintain it, have it inspected. There's zero waste and cleanup programs for beaches and lakes, et cetera. Riparian buffers, just like green infrastructure and bioswales, riparian buffers offer a great filtration opportunity for us to prevent silt, nutrients, bacteria, 6-PPD quinone from getting into salmon-bearing streams. So riparian zones, really, really important, et cetera. The nice thing about green infrastructure these days is a lot of urban governments, municipal governments are working fast and furious to embark on a number of different projects to protect urban waters and render them more healthy for fish. So we will continue our journey with our vehicle that's out here right now, and we're working with these partners to do a better job providing Western science, that it has a comfortable fit with Indigenous and local knowledge, where the sense of place and value is preeminently important. And we're going to continue doing this in support of solutions and actions. So I want to thank everybody in the room, and of course the Lil'wat and Squamish First Nations, and Mandy and the Whistler Institute for having us, Lynn, Peggy, Tom, and the Whistler Lakes Conservation Team, and all of you. So that's it from me. Thank you.
Welcome, everybody. My name is Michael Blackstock, and my Gitxsan name is Amagorum Get. I just wanted to thank the Whistler Institute, the Whistler Lakes Conservation Foundation, and Nita Lakes Lodge for providing the lovely room that I'm staying in today. Thank you very much. I'd also like to acknowledge that I'm a visitor on the Lil'wat Squamish First Nations traditional territory. In the Gitxsan Nation, my aunties taught me that whenever I come to a new nation's territory, that go visit the elders and acknowledge that you're a visitor. So I'd like to start with the next slide. Here I got the magic wand. What I'm going to share with you is three kind of sections here. One is to acknowledge the elders that I work with in my research. That's very important to me because they're part of the research team. And then I want to talk about the results of the research. I'm not going to talk about the methodology here tonight, but there's papers out there that if you're interested, you can check. Then I want to focus on hope and action. My colleagues have done a great job talking about the quantity and quality of water, and I'm going to sort of launch off from that, give you a bit of an Indigenous perspective on water, and then some new ideas that evolved out of the interweaving the Indigenous perspective with Western science. So my nation is up in northwestern British Columbia. It's called the Gitxsan Nation. There's about 5,000 people that live in our nation, and quite a few live in Vancouver. We have a Gitxsan Nation society in Vancouver that meets regularly. We're called the people of the River of Mist. There's a number of rivers in our territory, the Kispioks, the Skeena, and the Bulkley rivers. And that's a photo there that I took just right at the junction of the Bulkley and the Skeena. I call myself an independent Indigenous scholar because my work is done independently, basically on my own time and my own coin. And that's as a result of the advice from these elders that they thought it was important that their wisdom was shared from a non-biased perspective, so they wanted me to do my research sort of independently. So I didn't do it for a thesis or a PhD thesis, or I didn't do it for work, or didn't do it for paid, by a company or anything. And it's all, the main purpose here is to share the perspective of the Indigenous elders and interweave it with Western science. So my research question was deceptively simple, I found out. The research question is just simply, what is water? And I started off looking at the Western science perspective and then interviewed elders to try and get the Indigenous perspective, and then compared them. So there's a lot of detail behind that, but let's start off with the simplest one, and that is the question, what is water? And basically a lot of the concepts that I'm going to share with you today are focused on interweaving new wisdom from Indigenous peoples into our grade 5, 6 science. And so if we were there back in grade 5 and 6 and we're learning about water, it would be like 2 hydrogen and 1 oxygen atom. And science doesn't classify water as living. Where on the other hand, with First Nations, they see it as life-giving, or water is life. They see it as a living spirit. They see it as their grandmother, their mother, a relative. And the two quickly become noticeably different. And if we're operating basically our science, or in the case of Indigenous wisdom, from a different foundation, how sturdy is the building that we build upon it? And I hope you leave wondering about that, because the hope is that if we recheck some of our foundational assumptions, it's there that lies the hope, that we have the humility to recheck our assumptions that were made as early as in the 1700s, and I'll share some of that with you later. When I was on the UNESCO panel, expert advisory panel for water and cultural diversity, we were tasked by the United Nations to come up with a new water policy. And to do that, we started off right where the elders wanted us to, and that is redefining what water is. And we came up with this definition that you see here on this slide, which is much different than the chemistry, non-living kind of entity that we learn about in elementary school. If we start moving, looking at the ripple effects of changing the definition of water, let's go back to 1735 when Carl Linnaeus published Systema Naturae. Out of that, he's called in the Western science kind of the father of the classification of nature. There's an excellent book by Jason Roberts called Every Living Thing, the Great and Deadly Race to Know All of Life, that talks about Linnaeus's work and another contemporary of his, Buffon, a French scientist, who also came up with a way of classifying life. And it was basically, if you're familiar, pardon this example, but VHS and beta. And we know that, for the audio files, that beta was a much superior format, but VHS won out. Here we have another example in the 1700s where the classification system of Linnaeus, who was known to support the slave trade and was a very patriarchal kind of a person, and also, didn't support the Indigenous viewpoints, his system came out with the support of the church. Buffon, on the other hand, wanted to work with Indigenous nations and use their names for the classification of nature, but unfortunately his beta system didn't prevail. But at that time, hopefully we can learn from that, and given the ripple effects of changing the definition of water, why is water not classified in our system of classifying nature? In 1735, the first edition of Systema Naturae had in it 3 kingdoms, the classifying life. One was animal, one was vegetable, and the other was mineral. So for example, jade, the mineral jade, it has a Latin name because Linnaeus came up with the binomial Latin classification. Lapis, let's see, I wrote it down here to make sure. Nephrositis is the Latin name for mineral, but there's nothing for water. Why is that? If water is life, why haven't we completed the circle of classification? And so one of the proposals, based on the elders' advice, is to fix that. The vision that appears out of this work is basically interweaving 2 perspectives. And interweaving doesn't mean going to the First Nation and saying we met with them and now they're part of the research project. It means having humility and going back into the foundations of Western science and repairing some things that the First Nations have pointed out. And that one of them is is the definition of water. The other is proposing this new kingdom called hydros. And the vision that comes out of this would help guide us in making decisions around new development or doing, for example, new development. The vision of blue ecology is an ecological philosophy which emerged from interweaving Indigenous and Western thought that acknowledges water's essential rhythmical life spirit and central functional role in the generating, sustaining, and receiving, and ultimately unifying Earth. A test that comes out of that, an environmental test, is the water first one, and is that the first question you would ask a real estate developer in Whistler is, how is it going to affect the water? How is it going to affect the quality and quantity of water in Whistler? Because water is a unifying power, has unifying powers, and basically links every living thing to other living things. And if you've read Dr. Suzanne Simard's work around the mysteries that are underground in the root systems of our forest, water is one of the transporters of that mystery, and it interconnects everything with everything else. So what a good place to start with as a real estate developer. If they can't answer that question, then you know that they probably can't answer any of the other environmental tests. And unfortunately, in British Columbia, environmental impact assessments didn't have a measure for, didn't have what's called a value and a value component of the environmental assessment. It didn't even look at the impacts of proposed developments because our foundation had an error, and that it was how we defined water, that water didn't have a place in how we classified nature. And so the elders are proposing that that be fixed. There are 5 principles that guide decision-making, and they are listed here. The most important one is that water has a spirit, and that, again, that is back to the definition of water. The pathway to harmony in our environment is humility. That's how we get there. And that really is looking at our own ways of knowing. The dominant system in Canada right now is Western science, so Indigenous people are asking the Western science people to go on a new journey, a hopeful journey, because, you know, personally, and Indigenous people also believe that Western science has great things to offer. It just has some flaws. Indigenous wisdom is an opportunity, that's the hope, to interweave it with Western science, fix the flaws, and move into a more hopeful future. All of this leads to, you know, to a concept that arises out of blue ecology, and that's natural intelligence. We're all being fire-hosed, the artificial intelligence advertising and propaganda now. Artificial intelligence, like Western science, has some great things in it. But if our world is driving around the idea of artificial intelligence, it won't be balanced. And one of the principles of blue ecology is balance. If we don't balance artificial intelligence with natural intelligence, or balance Western science with Indigenous wisdom, or balance the definition of water with chemistry and spirit, or balance, I'm shooting for what's called a balance between using our heart and our mind. Artificial intelligence is the brain. It's not the heart. So how do we balance it? We balance it with natural intelligence. Here are some of the ecosystem engineers out there, the ants, the beaver, the trees. All of them have abilities beyond ours. I want to do here, there's a concept that you learned probably again in grade 5, 6, 7, anthropomorphizing. There we go, I said it. You were told not to do that. Don't do that. Don't equate the animals with humans because we're superior. Please abandon that idea. Ants aren't humans. but they're smart. And we were taught not to anthropomorphize because we wanted to make sure that humans were above these critters so that we could rationalize our abuse of them. That's essentially what it is. So to seek this balance, to find the hope, we need to look to these guys. And by the way, they're free. They offer their services for free. Artificial intelligence, you'll be paying subscriptions every month, and you'll be paying higher energy bills because they're going to have to double the amount of energy in North America to be able to power artificial intelligence. The sun powers these guys, and it's free. So there's a comparison to them. That's not saying one's better than the other, but together they're better. And that's where the hope is. We've been unbalanced, and we need to right that balance, and that's where the hope is. Climate change is a subset of the problems that we're facing. If we take a new attitude towards the way we interact with our world, if we throw a switch from water isn't living to water is living, if we throw a switch saying, yeah, let's make water part of the natural classification system and put hydros in there. If we look at climate change from a water perspective rather than just strictly carbon cycle perspective, we'll get some new understandings. So I'm going to close off with what can you do? And what can you do as individuals and a community and as a nation? Well, you start with yourself and with a ceremony that the Gitxsan people have called Sasatuik, which means make a conscious decision every day to connect with nature. And a lot of Indigenous nations around the world actually do this with what I call going to the water ceremony, and that's just going to your local lake, creek, river, glacier, wherever water's found, and just connect with it. That personal ceremony, that personal decision you make every day will affect your attitude and the way you behave and the way you interact. At Whistler, hope will be born through an attitude shift because the systems that we have in place right now are not serving us well. So we need to look at the assumptions of that system as far back as 1735, right those wrongs, and build a collaborative team with everybody to solve the problems. So a new definition of water if blue ecology, if Whistler was to become a blue ecology community, they would have a new definition of water. You don't need to change an act, you don't need permission, you don't need money to do it. You don't need money or an act or permission to add hydros to the way we classify nature. You don't need money, permission, or a new act to add new principles to how you look at environmental planning. You can market yourself as having natural intelligence, and that will catch the eye of people that are trying to promote and sell artificial intelligence. You'll have people coming here and wondering, what are these people in Whistler up to? And you can create healing zones, and I'll close with this. There was one of the elders, that Mary Thomas, she was concerned about a mountain that was burned just above Salmon Arm. They were logging the mountain while the fire was still burning, and she said, why are you doing that? This mountain has already suffered, and you're logging it while it's still suffering from the fire. We need to let it heal. Thank you very much.
So we're going to move to Q&A, so I'll invite the other panelists to join us on stage, and I'm just going to get some microphones. One moment. because we're recording, I would ask that you ask the question into the microphone, and then Alex is going to bring you the microphone. So by show of hands, does anybody have any questions? Oh, Alex, oh, the man in the yellow t-shirt.
There's more than one hand.
Sorry.
Hi, I'm wondering what the shrub principles are?
Oh, oh.
I'll speak loud, how about that? The shrub principles are, there we go. We got that one. I was looking at the Western Science water cycle and trying to design a blue ecology water cycle that based on the elders' input. And what was missing from the Western Science one was a few things. One was the spirit of water, the origin. There are origin stories that we have in the Gitxsan Nation, other nations have, is where did water come from? And so the spirit principle is to remind us of where water came from in the Indigenous storytelling, but also to instill the respect for water. So, for example, that's why the spirit's there. Respect, that's kind of an obvious one. A lot of nations have what we call giving back ceremonies. If we're taking water or medicinal plants or whatever from the forest, we give back either through ceremony or offering gifts. And that respect, that reciprocal relation is important. Harmony is achieved through humility. We're not gonna, if somebody is sort of, say there was a nation to the south of us that had an arrogant leader, we would be out of harmony, for example, right? You're not gonna achieve harmony there. So we need that harmony. Unity, water connects everything to everything else. And balance, I talked about the balance of perspectives. And when we're out of balance, that's called colonialism. And we're in balance, that's called reconciliation. So those are the principles, and they're meant to guide decision making. There's a French leadership concept called prévoyance, which is appropriate for these times. It's, again, rooted in the 16th, 17th century, but it's the ability to make decisions in uncertain and dangerous times on limited information by the use of principles. You can't use data, you can't research fast enough because the rate of climate change for now is accelerating. We just don't have the time to do a lot of research. Even though we've got great researchers, they need time just to do their work. So given that we're not going to have perfect information, that they're going to arrive with as good of information as they have, we need to make decisions based on principles. So that's the short answer, short-ish.
First of all, thank you to all the speakers and for the work that you're doing in our community. It's really important. I'd like to give a plug initially to Dr. Suzanne Simard, who Michael mentioned. She is actually speaking in Whistler at the O'Day Museum on Friday, April 25th, just next Friday. And thanks for Mandy for the registrations. If you go to the Whistler Institute on their calendar, you can, oh no, wait a minute, it's through Aware. That's the other one. So you can go to the Aware website and register and hear Dr. Suzanne Simard speak here about her research on trees. My question is for Michael. You mentioned about what municipalities could do around development, and do you have any examples of communities that are incorporating those principles into their work and into their bylaws, et cetera?
Thank you for the question. Yeah, just a shout out to Suzanne. She was a colleague of mine. We worked in Kamloops together in the Forest Service, and so I've been following her work. I have great admiration for her work now at UBC, so that's great. And I also noticed on your, as I was reading about that event you're talking about, and Nootka Lake Lodge is one of the sponsors for that. And so I just give a shout out to them because that's showing leadership. I mean, they're providing accommodation for me for this event, and they're at other events. So good on it to them to doing that kind of stuff. The examples are like, I forgot to promote myself because I'm a terrible marketer and my board's going to be mad, but part of a co-founder of the Blue Ecology Institute Foundation, and we're a partner with the Water Sustainability Partnership and Nature Kids BC. And Kim, you're here somewhere. Where are you? There. Yeah. So we have members from the partnership here. We're working with the Cowichan Water Board and the communities around there to start a process where we're implementing Blue Ecology. I've talked to a number of communities. We're young, small institute, so we're just in the nascent beginnings of trying to work with communities.
Next question, and I should have clarified, if you have a specific question for the panel, you can say their name, or if it's a question for the panel as a whole.
Michael, how you doing? One of the things you talked about was attitude and the shift in attitude. And we all know that the leaders of any local government, provincial, it's the attitude of the people or what the people want is the way they're going to go. So the people have a lot of power if we can get that attitude changed. So when it comes to water, how do we do that? Like I mean, this is good, but there's not a million people sitting here listening. So how do we get that out?
Yeah, that's a great question, Ted. And Ted and I have talked about this before, about the power of attitudes, and we're not talking about the 13-year-old self-facing your parents' attitude. We're talking about the kind of theories, philosophies, principles, and beliefs that shape your behavior, or in case of institutions, their decision-making. And partly that's rooted in your I use the grade 5, 6 science as an example because that's where some of our attitudes were formed, some deeply formed held attitudes, and about what water is, for example, and having people go back there and providing them an opportunity to make a shift and show the benefits of it, that it is in the grade 5, 6 level. I'm not sure, these gentlemen here know a lot about toxicology and water way more than I do, but I'm focusing on that grade 5, 6 level because that shapes the foundation. And a lot of our decision making is based on assuming the foundation is solid, and the First Nations are saying, well, we see some cracks. So I think it's partly opening the conversation around using water as an example to make a shift around attitude, and that I keep emphasizing that changing your attitude is free. And with the climate change discussion we're hearing is that it's going to take gazillion dollars, it's going to take a lot of new technology, it's going to take time, it's going to impact jobs. Oh my God, that just sounds overwhelming. Or I'm saying it's free. You've got free consultants out there in the natural intelligence world that you can draw upon. Free is good. So that's why I kind of use that, is to help shift the attitude. Yeah, hopefully that helps.
Thank you so much. I have a question for Peter. You talked a lot about surface water, and I was wondering if you look at any of those pollutants that you mentioned going into the groundwater in any of the communities that you've done research in.
Yeah, thank you. Water is only part of the picture of pollution, of course. Is that on? Yes, it is. And if we think about one of 500,000 chemicals on the Canadian market and where they end up in the environment, they can evaporate or volatilize into the air. They can head into water. And once they're in water, they're going to decide whether they're water soluble or fat soluble, which means particle active. A lot of pollutants are particle active. They're going to get down into the sediments. When we think about water, the greatest threats to groundwater are those compounds that are water soluble. In other words, they're not getting bind up in soils or sediments or fines or organic carbon. We have looked at some groundwater, particularly in the Fraser Valley after the great floods of late 2021. And we looked at an aquifer that is providing drinking water for a major city. I'm not going to name it because I haven't followed up with the briefing with the municipality. And in that aquifer, we found cocaine, we found a number of pesticides, we found hydrocarbons, and a number of other things. So ultimately, this is the embarrassment of riches that scares the bejeebers out of me. You go to Switzerland or Holland or Scandinavia, you're driving down the road, you'll see these signs saying, there's an aquifer here, drive carefully, you know, or no petroleum-laden trucks are allowed past this point. In Canada, it's like, oh, there's groundwater. Well, there's water everywhere. We don't really value it, and we understudy it. So groundwater, absolutely important. The people that understand it best are probably private homeowners that have a well. And they know that they have to monitor it for metals and coliform and deal with it that way. But yeah, my hope is that in the way that I look at water, that we start with a big conversation about surface water and what we're doing to water quality on land, and then, you know, transition that conversation into where's that going? Is it going out to sea? Is it getting used as irrigation for crops or livestock, or is it getting into the water table, which is basically, harming future supplies of drinking water? So doing a little bit of that, but it's an understudied, underappreciated resource for sure.
I do a lot of work in the health sector, and the framework that I use very often is that of two-eyed seeing that Mi'kmaq elder Albert Marshall has put forward. So a lot of what you were describing really resonates for me in terms of bringing different world views together to solve a problem. And I'm wondering if we could talk about world views in the context of how are other municipalities like Whistler around the world doing with respect to glaciers, water protection, and so forth. Is there a consortium of municipalities that could work together on the world scene that could make a difference? Are we doing better? Are we doing worse? Where are we at? So a question about water and about glacier, really.
I'll stay in my lane and talk about ice, but certainly if you go to the European Alps, for example, some of the smallest glaciers, they have shrouded them in the summertime. They'll put a blanket, and certainly for Whistler, Blackcomb, these are small glaciers, and people have proposed and have used, I understand, some ways to mitigate that. But back to what communities do, when I think about Europeans, maybe it's the density of people. There seems to be an understanding and an appreciation that one of the solutions is to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions. And so you see that with the green technologies. On the way down from Prince George today, we heard about a project near Munich, I believe, in Germany, where they're actually doing geothermal and using it to heat, I think, 40,000 houses. So there are actions. Unfortunately for the glaciers, there's like a larger action that does require a lot of people to work together. But I would say visiting a glacier, when I do that, I do feel a sense of sadness, but also I feel more motivated to get the word out about what we're doing, what's happening, so that others may understand what's happening.
I was going to add, very interesting, I've worked with different levels of government. I worked as a federal scientist for 15 years, and Ottawa did not appreciate scientists spontaneously coming up to advise the policymakers. Scientists had to stay in their lane and do the science, and then it was up to the policymakers to figure out whether it was relevant or important or how to proceed with it. One of the things I've really noticed change over the last 10 years, and I find it very empowering and motivational. Well, there are really two things. One is UNDRIP, or UNDRIPA, which is the reconciliation conversation, whereby a lot of First Nations are more open to collaborating and working with like-minded people, no matter where they're coming from. And that includes Western scientists. But there's a real motivation around habitat, waterways, restoration. There's a lot of interest in restoration, and that gives me hope, because that restoration, you run into it with post-fire, post-forest fire, you run into it post-flood scenarios, you run into it in communities and along riverbanks and riparian zones. Very exciting times for salmon in BC right now at the local level. The other thing I find encouraging is that municipal governments know about 6-ppd quinone. In fact, it's the strangest chemical. I've studied thousands of different chemicals, and there is one chemical that they're aware of in Ottawa, and that's 6-ppd quinone. It got a lot of attention. And so on the one hand, I'm going, oh, crying out loud. You know, people are paying attention to one chemical. There's thousands of other ones we really have to be worried about. Why are they blindly following this one? On the other hand, I say, that's an ambassador. If we can get people to follow 6-ppd quinone, why it's in road runoff and why it's in tires and how it's regulated, how it's harming fish, we can use it as an ambassador into the world of habitat, of fish, of green infrastructure. So the City of Vancouver has over 140 green infrastructure projects, and this is the engineering departments now, not the environmental sustainability departments that have basically no cash. It's the deep-pocketed multi-billionaires in engineering works that know about road runoff, are paying attention to healthy urban waterways, and are working at a local level. So that gives me a lot of hope, because for the longest time, I found there's an incredible disconnect between Ottawa, the provinces, and the municipalities. But the municipalities are taking a lot on right now and spending money and doing so under pressure from their citizens.
My question builds on that. For all of the panelists, if there was one policy change you could see happen at the federal, provincial, or municipal level to protect glaciers and watersheds, what would it be?
You know what I'm going to say. Reduction of greenhouse gases. And I think that there needs to be a concerted effort, not just local, national, but also has to be international. And I was told that I was supposed to come up with hope and good news stories. And I will say that if humans, I'm going to say the non-intelligent, I like ants. I'm sort of scared of ants, but I do appreciate ants. If we could get our act together, that those glaciers, the glaciers that are behind us on the mountain, they will come back. It will take some time. We've unfortunately committed to a lot of them wasting away, but a reduction of greenhouse gases does translate into renewed growth of glaciers, and that is something to be hopeful for going forward.
Two things, practical ones. Number one, I would like to see green or blue biosolids. Everyone knows what biosolids are? Biosolids are the solids retained by wastewater treatment plants. Liquid effluent goes out into the Strait of Georgia. Biosolids is basically human waste, and it used to be called night soil. It's distributed or sold throughout BC for certain types of agriculture, for mining reclamation, and for silviculture and forestry management. So it's a nutrient, it's a fertilizer. But the province only screens for metals and fecal coliform. They don't look for PFAS, they don't look for pharmaceuticals, they don't look for pesticides or PCBs or flame retardants. We're spreading this all over our province in the name of beneficial uses. So I'd like to see an initiative that would clean up biosolids. So we don't keep spreading pollutants all over our agricultural areas. That's number one. Number two, agricultural land reserves. We're very proud of them here in BC. Protects the limited lands that we have available for crops and contributes to food security. But did you know that you don't need to have any riparian zone protections if you have ALR land? You can have blueberries right up to salmon-bearing streams, and you can spray pesticides right up to salmon-bearing streams. We've got to get rid of the riparian zone exclusions under the ALR. That's the second thing. Riparian zones, for the thousands of chemicals I could dream up or think about, offer us great opportunity to filter out harmful chemicals, whatever they are, and protect salmon for future generations.
Policies have a section at the beginning called definitions. And so change the definition of water.
Good evening. I'm a British import here, and coming from the lush British land of beautiful water that we have, was very concerned about, when I arrived in Canada, found it very dry. And living in BC in the past 11 years, I am, my daughter's actually a marine biologist, so Peter, I think she knows you. But I'm just very concerned about what's happening with the fire smart. And over the last year and a half, I've connected with Dr. Rhonda Milligan, who's an ecologist here, who's been trying to suggest other ways of perhaps not necessarily doing fire smart, but fire smart and perhaps some green plantings around the various municipality areas, and also with sprinkler systems, increasing sprinkler systems, and Hakai Designs, who's a landscape person in this area, has been working very hard with Rhonda on this. We're all volunteers doing this. She asked me, and I'm proposing a question here. Are they aware that the fuel thinning requires 30 to 50% removal of trees, and fire smart requires removal of trees within the 30-meter of infrastructure? Even, this is particularly as the Fitzsimmons Creek, even if this is a riparian, if this is in riparian zones, how is this impacting watersheds, particularly with increasing flooding with climate change? Are they interested in collaborating with our community research to test an alternative approach to wildfire mitigation, where they don't cut trees and instead provide increased resilience to climate change using native perennial plants and so on? There's another two questions, but maybe I'll ask another time later. But perhaps Michael and Peter have some answers. Thank you.
So I just understand your question there. You're talking about wildfire rehabilitation or the prevention?
And just not using, we're worried about the water coming down from the mountain, not being used properly because now vegetation's taken away.
Great, yeah. So the hydrophobic soils after a fire and that sort of thing, yeah. Lots of good stuff here. Yeah, well, I'll go back to where I closed my talk. That in 1998 there was a fire on the mountain above Salmon Arm. The Secwepemc name for it was Calazan. It was basically burnt the whole mountain just above Salmon Arm, and the local First Nations, led by Elder Mary Thomas, set up a roadblock stopping the harvesting on that mountain. And then enter me as one of my roles as a chartered mediator. So I was sent there to try and figure out that conflict. And the message was that the mountain is hurting. It's just been burnt. And that we're not going to let you hurt it anymore. This is 1998, and these elders are well aware of climate change at that point, and that's kind of the passion of why I've taken this on, is their awareness of climate change way back then. Is that the way we do environmental assessments in British Columbia is there's something called cumulative effects. And the question there, the way I boil it down, is how long can we keep harvesting, or how long can we let climate change do its damage until it's hurt enough, the land is hurt so much that we have to stop. That's the way our systems are built right now. And with the Indigenous perspective around Elder Mary Thomas's, wait until it's healed. We have to wait long enough before we can start. Again, that's the switch, that's the attitude switch. The system where we have in British Columbia is how long can we keep doing this until we have to stop? And if you're in a relationship with the land in the Indigenous way, is how long can we wait until we receive these gifts? So healing zones are a concept that comes out of that, is that let's leave that area to heal. We don't do anything on it that's going to hurt it. And we may have to wait 5, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years.
Actually clearing the land, ocelot is clearing the land.
Fire smarting is preventing fire.
I know that, but are we doing too much of it? Because the footage has been very, very dry.
Yeah, again, that has to be, for me, it's like site specific. I don't know the answer to that question. I don't think fire smarting of its own is a bad thing. I think it's just a good idea. But where and how you do it, and on what land you're doing it on, and what relationship you have with that land, and what your attitude towards that land is the question that I'm trying to raise.
Building in green fabrics, green shrubs, so that they would...
Right, yeah, like planting deciduous and that sort of stuff to act as a natural fire break. That gets into the natural intelligence realm, right? Where you work with nature to do it, and that's a great approach. Again, yeah.
Also, that would be also catching the water from the Glacier Run.
Yeah.
I don't want to cut you off because I know this is a really good dynamic, but I wanted to get to one more question because there's a lot of hands going up, and it's 7:27, so I'd like to get to one more, and then we can wrap up.
This is a little touchy subject. I'm sure everybody will agree, and I might speak to for all of us here tonight, living in Whistler as a destination ski resort. How do we feel about what we do here for global warming and all the other things that happen, glacial recession and all that kind of thing? We're lucky to live here, probably most of us, but it wouldn't exist without jet travel and all that other sort of thing. And I know it's just one example of that, of other things that go on around the planet, but this is our home, and help me sleep better tonight.
And so the question is what? How do we...
Well,
it's a personal question. You'll get from me a personal answer. Whistler's great. I love the snow. I love skiing. I love being outside. I love having that vista to look down into the valleys. I'm acknowledging that I'm taking advantage of frozen water. There's a lot of hydro that supports the energy needs at Whistler, so it's not like these diesel-powered lifts and things. There's a lot of GHGs associated with international travelers coming here. It's a multifaceted thing. I don't know. I love skiing. And when I think about that, I used to cross-country ski. It scares me to no end to realize that our winters are getting shorter, the snows are less abundant, and less predictable, and the magic of snowfall, of snowmen, of ski hills is waning in some ways. That's terrible. I don't think we should stop something like Whistler because I think it connects people to snow and to glaciers and to water. But I think we can do a better job of making sure that our footprint is minimalized and that the messaging is good around the users, the guests from other countries, et cetera. We can do a better job protecting the streams going through the town site. We can think about the PFAS chemicals that are on our ski bases. That's the forever chemicals. So we got to be informed about the products that we might be using. The old water-resistant repellent chemicals, that's also Scotchgard and PFAS forever chemicals. So there are a lot of things that we use as consumers or skiers that we may not even know about. Love skiing. I think we should encourage it as an outdoor activity, exercise. I think we can do a much better job of informing the user and having the community take responsibility for monitoring and engagement that would protect that ski hill and use the messages to protect other ski hills and connect in to the capitals that have to negotiate for greenhouse gas emissions.
That's a good topic. Related to hope, I think, is what if people from around the world came to Whistler for another reason? And that is to see, wow, look at what these guys are doing here. They've decided to shift their attitude towards their relationship with the land around here, make different decisions. And let's see what they're up to. Maybe it's going to work. That's what I think. I think that's where the hope is. And I think that comes with being in true partnership, a humble partnership with the First Nations in this area.
I would echo that, and maybe a specific example might be, so travelers are coming here. As you witness what's happening in the summertime, for example, even though you may have come on an aircraft, I think you can actually use that information to decide yourself how much are you going to travel, but also in terms of Whistler as an example, passive communities. And so having a passive house, really understanding that there are ways to mitigate yourself in terms of your own greenhouse gas footprint. We put in a heat pump this last September. It's a little bit noisy, but we pulled out our gas furnace, and it's been great. It's lovely to have. It was also nice to have provincial and federal support for putting that in. We still paid some money, but I sleep a little bit better. I don't sleep perfectly because I still know that I do have a carbon footprint. And but back to people living here, I think you have the ability to also educate people that are coming in from all around the world about how to do it sustainably, how to have that environment where perhaps you can take some of the information that they're learning and they can transmit it elsewhere.
Thank you all. If I can have you remain seated for just 1 minute. We have closing remarks from Cascade Environmental, Dave Williamson and Candace Rose Taylor, who were our wonderful sponsors for this evening. So just 1 moment. Oh, and while they do that, I am presenting gifts to our panelists on behalf of Whistler Lakes. They are getting the glasses that you will also be receiving upon exit.
Hi, everyone. My name is Candace Rose Taylor, and I'm one of the principals at Cascade Environmental. I would like to thank Dr. Brian Menounos, Dr. Peter Ross, and Michael Blackstock for their thought-provoking and engaging discussion this evening. I would also like to thank the Whistler Lakes for their partnership in this Global Perspectives event.
My name's Dave Williamson. I'm one of the directors and a founder of Cascade Environmental, as well as a past board member and past chair of the Whistler Institute. This is the part where I'm supposed to share a takeaway from the presentation, but I've actually got three. I mean, it was really interesting to see the presentation of glacial change, and I think we need to revisit that constantly. We need to be reminded, because it's easy to put it in the back of your mind and forget about it. I haven't been up to Wedge Glacier in probably 30 years. I think I'll probably see a difference when I get back up there, hopefully this summer. Sucralose, that one really stuck with me. It was like, we do a lot of water sampling at Cascade, and we got to start looking at maybe some different parameters. And the sucralose one is something that really stuck with me. I like the idea of natural intelligence and the concept of water first. I like to think that with a company named Cascade, we are water first, and I wore my water shirt here today. And I'm going to steal that phrase, "the mountain is hurting." It's time for that to stop, because right now I'm sitting on a recovery committee for the Gun Lake fire, and the Ministry of Forests cannot wait to get in there and clear cut all the burned timber. And we keep saying, maybe it's time to just stop. And so anyways.
The Cascade has been doing business in the Sea to Sky for over 35 years, and we feel strongly about protecting our environment, as echoed by Dave's story here, and supporting local initiatives and promoting a circular economy. We support the Whistler Institute because it ticks all of these boxes and promotes life learning and self-improvement.
So I'd like to, again, thank the major sponsors, the RMOW, the McLean McQuaig Foundation, Bob and Sue Adams, our ongoing Global Perspectives event supporters, like Tom and Yoni Lightburn, and the small supporters that contribute with monthly donations, and all of you would qualify for that if you would like. It goes through Canada Helps, and it just happens every month, and you barely notice it. So I'd like to thank the audience for attending, and ask you again to consider supporting the Whistler Institute, and complete the feedback survey so that we can continue to grow and improve these events based on your output. Again, thank you very much.